My name is General Whitmore. I'm 38 years old, and 3 minutes ago I was reaching for a piece of cornbread at my grandmother's table. Now I'm face down on the hardwood floor, my wrists locked in handcuffs, and my brother shouting charges that sound like he's waited years to say out loud. 20 relatives freeze mid-bite, eyes wide say, then, just as I think it's over, 6 soldiers burst through the front door. But they don't salute James, they salute me. Brigadier General Whitmore, the officer says, we're here to extract you. And in that moment, the silence speaks louder than the accusation. I was always the quiet one, not the shy one, not the soft one, just quiet. The kind of quiet that made people uncomfortable. While the other kids played dress-up or screamed through the backyard, I sat with maps, real maps, studying troop movements from battles long past. I memorized Morse code before I learned cursive. When I was 10, I recited the NATO phonetic alphabet at Thanksgiving, and Uncle Roy thought it was a joke. My parents didn't laugh. They just exchanged glances over mashed potatoes and changed the subject. James, on the other hand, was golden. Quarterback at East Oak High, prom king, student council president. Every time he entered a room, it was like a spotlight followed him. Our mother called him our miracle, and our father took him on fishing trips that I was never invited to. I wasn't bitter, not exactly. I was just aware. Aware of where I stood in the hierarchy of love, of approval, of who got second helpings without asking, and who had to clean up the plates. At family dinners, James's stories were the main course. My silence, dessert. I became a shadow in my own house. And over time, I stopped trying to step into the light. I found refuge in discipline, in order, in the idea that somewhere out there was a place where structure mattered more than smiles. A place where being different wasn't a sin, it was strategy. But there was one night, one moment when I tried. I was 16. James had just won some regional police cadet award and the family threw a big dinner. Balloons, a cake with a badge piped in blue icing, and all our aunts crying like he'd saved the world. I sat at the corner of the table staring at my glass of Sprite and rehearsing in my head what I was going to say. When the moment lulled, right between my father's toast and Grandma's teary-eyed hug, I stood up. My voice trembled, but I made it loud enough to carry. I've been accepted into the National Young Defence Scholars Programme, I said. It's sponsored by the Department of Defence. They only take 20 students nationwide. The room went still, not the proud kind of still, just pause. My mother blinked slowly. That's lovely, dear, she said, reaching for a napkin. Then, as if remembering something important, she added, but don't bring that kind of thing up during James's celebration. Let's not take away from his moment. I sat down. That moment branded me. It wasn't rejection with shouting or fury. It was quiet dismissal, the kind that told you, your value is conditional, not just based on what you do, but on how well it fits into the narrative already written for you. And mine clearly didn't. After that, I stopped announcing things. When I got into the Western Tactical Academy 2 years later, I didn't tell anyone until the day I left. I booked my own flight, packed my own bags, and slipped out of the house at dawn. My mother was still asleep. My father was out jogging. James was home for the summer, but he didn't say goodbye. I left behind a note on the fridge, not out of courtesy, just logistics. What they didn't know, what they never cared to ask, was that I wasn't running away. I was heading toward something, toward a life where merit mattered, where silence wasn't weakness, where women could wear uniforms and not be told they were doing it for attention or trying to prove something. That was the first day I felt free. And still, even now, years and ranks later, I can feel that moment like it's stitched into my spine. The moment you realize your own family doesn't see you. Not really. Not even when you're standing right in front of them. Western Tactical Academy was not a place for second chances or soft landings. It was 5 a.m. drills, 90 Sabines rucksacks, and instructors who believed eye contact was a sign of weakness. The first week alone claimed a quarter of the class. Injuries, breakdowns, voluntary withdrawals. I didn't blink. I didn't falter. I didn't make friends. I was 18, far from home, with no one writing letters or sending care packages. I shared a barracks with 6 other women, most of whom bonded over shared playlists or high school drama. I stayed quiet. I mapped escape routes in my head before I fell asleep. I memorized command chains like lullabies. And slowly, painfully, I became excellent. Not the loud kind of excellent, not the kind that asked for applause. I became the cadet others didn't want to spar with. The one who hit targets on the first try, ran the obstacle course in record time, and stayed after lights out studying declassified case files. My instructors took notice. My peers mostly kept their distance, except for one, Mia Travers. She was bright, strategic, funny in a dry, bone-cutting way that reminded me of home. She didn't push past my silence. She just sat near me, occasionally offering half a protein bar or asking for feedback on her field assessments. Over time, we grew into something like trust. We partnered for simulations, backed each other in evaluations, and even swapped emergency contacts in case something ever went wrong. Something did. Our first international deployment was supposed to be low risk, surveillance training embedded with local security forces overseas. We weren't even carrying live rounds, just cameras, comms, and notebooks. But day 3 into the op, we were cornered, ambushed in a crowded marketplace by locals tipped off to our presence. I froze for half a second, caught off guard by the precision of the breach. It wasn't random. We were set up. Mia wasn't with me when it happened. She had volunteered to scout an alternate route. I later found out she'd been feeding intel, unverified, partial, about our unit's location to someone off-grid. Whether for money or for leverage, I never learned. The report was sealed. She was quietly discharged. I was lucky to escape with a dislocated shoulder and a collapsed eardrum. But something else happened that day. I understood fully and finally that silence was no longer just a coping mechanism. It was protection. My identity, my movements, my allegiances. Everything became locked behind clearances and layers of operational cover. I stopped sharing names, stopped answering casual questions, built a wall of discretion so high not even sunlight could scale it. And people mistook that for secrecy, for arrogance, even betrayal. The irony was that in learning to survive, I'd only deepened the distance between myself and the people who already didn't understand me. James sent a single text the week I was hospitalized. Mum says, "You're in some military accident. Hope it's not serious." That was the extent of it. No call, no visit, no mention again. I returned to duty 4 weeks later, earned commendations, rose in rank, led operations no one in my family even knew existed. And the silence, it stopped hurting mostly until the letter came. It arrived in a cream-coloured envelope, edges soft from travel. My name written in looping cursive I hadn't seen in years. Grandma Evelyn, the only person who ever looked at me and saw more than a disruption. Inside a note, short and gentle. Dinner this Sunday, 6 o'clock sharp. Everyone will be there. I miss hearing your voice. Just like that, the ice cracked. It had been nearly 11 years since I'd sat at that table. I could still remember where the creaky floorboard was near the sink, how the window over the stove caught the sunset. I could still hear James laughing too loudly, my mother correcting everyone's grammar, my father sipping bourbon and not quite looking at me. I folded the letter twice, tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket, and said nothing to anyone. But I booked the flight. I pulled 2 days of leave, approved without question, and packed like I was heading into contested territory. Not with weapons, but with calm. Not with armor, but with control. I chose a black dress, no uniform, no medals, just a pair of small pearl earrings, and a promise to myself, stay silent unless spoken to. Let them see who I am without me saying a word. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I owed Grandma more than absence. The house hadn't changed. White brick, green shutters, and the same ceramic frog on the porch that had greeted me since childhood. The lawn was trimmed, the flower beds neat, everything curated to look like nothing had ever fractured. But the moment I stepped through the front door, I felt it. The shift, a pause in conversation, the weight of collective scrutiny cloaked in welcome home smiles. "Claire," my mother said too brightly, arms outstretched like she hadn't forgotten every birthday for the past 5 years. "You look well," I smiled politely. "Thanks, Mum." James stood across the room, leaning against the fireplace like a man used to being observed. He raised his beer in a mock salute. "The prodigal returns." "Not quite," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Aunt Linda hovered, offering me a glass of something fizzy and non-committal. Cousin Amanda waved from the hallway. The air buzzed with polite tension, the kind that never breaks the surface, but lingers just under the skin. My father offered a nod from the recliner, not rising. I nodded back. Then Grandma appeared, wheeled in by Uncle Bill. Her face lit up in a way no one else's did. Genuine. Soft. "You made it," she said, voice thin but steady. "For you always," I answered, kneeling to kiss her cheek. Her hands, though frail, gripped mine with strength that surprised me. The dining room was already set. Roast beef, cornbread, green bean casserole, and peach cobbler cooling near the window. The same menu for every holiday. I took my place at the long table between Amanda and her teenage brother, Kyle. Kyle nudged me as I sat. "Mom says you live in DC. Is it true you work for spies?" I laughed. "No spies, mostly strategy." "Strategy's cool," he said, then returned to scrolling his phone. The meal started with the usual clatter of forks and half-hearted prayers. I kept my head down, answered questions in brief, palatable phrases. No one asked why I'd been gone so long. No one asked what I'd been doing. They asked where I'd flown in from, if the weather in DC was better than here, if I still liked green beans. Questions that sounded like connection, but weren't. James cleared his throat halfway through the main course. "Still doing that consulting gig, huh?" I didn't look at him. "Yep." He chuckled softly. "Funny. I looked up the firm last week. Couldn't find a thing. No website, no LinkedIn, no footprint at all. You'd think a professional would leave some kind of mark." My fork paused midair, but I didn't take the bait. Some clients prefer discretion. Amanda glanced between us, sensing something under the surface. My mother dabbed at her lips, not meeting my eye. My father suddenly became very interested in his wine glass. James leaned back, smirking. "Or maybe it's easier to say you have a job when no one can check." That one landed, a slow, deep twist just below my ribcage. I smiled anyway, the kind of smile that feels like pressing on a bruise. You always were the curious one. "Someone has to be," he said, raising his glass. "Family deserves the truth." Before I could respond, Kyle piped up. "Hey, is it true you got kicked out of the army?" Silence snapped into place like a trap. I turned to him slowly. "What?" He shrugged, eyes wide with teenage innocence. "James said you got dishonorably discharged or something. Said that's why no one hears from you." All eyes turned to James. He sipped his drink unconcerned. The twist wasn't the accusation. It was the ease with which it slipped from my cousin's mouth. Casual, like gossip. Like it didn't matter if it was true, because the idea of me being a failure was easier to digest than the truth they never asked for. I placed my napkin gently beside my plate and folded my hands in my lap. "No, Kyle, I wasn't discharged. I've been serving continuously since I enlisted." The boy blinked. Amanda's fork froze. My mother stiffened. "James," he smirked wider. "Funny," he said, "because you sure don't act like someone with anything to be proud of." The silence stretched for a breath too long, a crack in the table's composure. Then James stood slow and deliberate, like a man rising in court to present Exhibit A. "You know," he said, voice casual but clipped, I didn't just Google you, Claire. I went further, had to, for peace of mind. I stared at him, my pulse steady, but my knuckles whitening beneath the tablecloth. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a manila folder, thin, unmarked, and somehow more threatening than any weapon I'd ever faced downrange. Since our dear sister never seems to have answers, James continued, eyes sweeping the table for moral support, I thought I'd bring a few of my own. He opened the folder and began sliding glossy prints across the table like playing cards. One by one, they made their way down the line. Photos of me entering buildings, speaking to men in suits, carrying unmarked cases. My family leaned in, lips pursed, eyebrows furrowing. Grainy, I know, James said, but it's hard to photograph a ghost. I didn't move, didn't blink. These were taken by a PI. Cost a bit, but worth every penny, especially when he dug up no formal employment records, no public military affiliation, no property under your name. It's like you don't exist, Claire, like you're just pretending. My mother's mouth opened slightly. My father glanced at the photos and then down at his plate. Amanda shifted in her seat. Even Kyle had stopped scrolling his phone. I'm not pretending, I said softly. James's jaw flexed. Then prove it. I don't have to. You don't want to, he snapped, because you can't, because everything you are is smoke and mirrors. Still, I didn't rise, didn't counterattack. I had learned long ago that some fights are lost the second you stand up. But then he said it. You made Mum ashamed. The words didn't shout. They landed, sharp, clean, final. She used to cry about you, said you were cold, distant, said you made her feel like a bad mother. Something inside me splintered. He leaned forward, voice lower now. You walked out of this house like we meant nothing, like you were better than us, and you've been hiding ever since. I looked at my mother, whose eyes didn't lift. At my father, who gripped his fork like it anchored him. At every cousin, aunt, and uncle who once knew me as the quiet girl at the edge of family photos, not one person said a word. Then James did the unthinkable. He pulled a badge from his back pocket and set it next to the folder. As a sworn officer of Greenville County, he said, I'm placing you under arrest for impersonating a federal officer and theft of government property. I felt the words hit the air like gunfire. No one moved. The cuffs came out next. Standard issue, metal gleaming under chandelier light. He took a step toward me, eyes alight with certainty. This isn't personal, he said. It's justice. And I stood, not because I was afraid, but because I refused to give him the drama he clearly craved. I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I turned and offered my wrists like they didn't belong to me. The cuffs clicked into place around me. Chairs scraped back. A gasp came from Aunt Linda. Grandma's oxygen machine hissed in the background. But the loudest sound was the silence, the kind that follows betrayal. The metal felt colder than I expected, not because of temperature, but because of memory. Sharp, final, unearned. The cuffs bit into the skin at the edge of my wrist bones as James secured them with an unnecessary click of finality. Grandma made a soft sound, a gasp or a whimper. I couldn't tell, but it cut through me far deeper than the cuffs ever could. James, she said weakly, her voice thin and trembling. What? What are you doing? He didn't answer her. His focus was locked on me, a smug determination written across his features, like a badge more important than the one clipped to his belt. You are under arrest, he repeated louder now, as if volume would lend authority, for impersonating a military officer and the unlawful possession of classified assets I didn't resist. My chin lifted slightly as I kept my posture calm. Around me, the silence thickened like fog. Aunt Carla pressed a napkin to her mouth. Uncle Greg shifted uncomfortably. Amanda had stopped chewing. Even Kyle lowered his phone. No one said a word. No one told him to stop. I kept my eyes steady, focused not on the accusation, but on the echoes of every moment before it, of every ignored award, every shrugged-off accomplishment, every look of that's not how we do things in this family. James gripped my elbow, ready to pull me from the room, and I let him for a beat. Then, as he turned to lead me toward the door, I leaned in just enough that only he could hear and said softly, "You might want to check the rank of the person you're putting in handcuffs." He blinked. "I mean it," I said, voice steady as steel. "You're not just wrong, you're in over your head." James scoffed, the smirk twitching at the corner of his mouth. Cute bluff, but his grip loosened just slightly. I continued, not loud, but with the authority of someone used to giving orders in war zones. "I'd hate for you to find out the hard way what it means to detain a superior officer under false pretenses." His jaw tensed. "Let's go," he said louder again now, trying to regain the momentum. "You're coming with me." "Behind us," Grandma whispered. "Please, not like this." Her voice broke something open in me. It wasn't a cry for justice. It was a plea for decency, one that echoed down a hallway of years I'd long thought sealed off. I turned my head just enough to catch her eyes, glassier than usual, filled with something between grief and apology. And yet, even in that moment, no one moved to stop James. The man who once sat across from me at Sunday breakfast, who used to leave me the last waffle when we were kids, had decided that making an example of me was more important than being my brother. The truth was, I'd been here before. Not on the floor in cuffs maybe, but in the eyes of people who were supposed to love me, looking at me like I was a stranger. This wasn't the first time I'd been discarded. It was just the first time the discard came with an audience and handcuffs. The humiliation wasn't in the accusation, it was in the fact that no one questioned it. That years of silence made it believable. I had built my entire adult life in the shadows because I had no one to share the light with, because being invisible was safer than being misunderstood. But this performance of justice at the dinner table, this was new, and James was basking in it. He gripped my arm tighter and moved to guide me toward the front door. Then came the sound. Not a knock, not a shout, a thud, low, sharp, and purposeful as the front door was thrown open. The front door didn't just open, it burst. 6 uniformed officers strode into the room with a presence that swallowed every conversation, every breath, every illusion of control. Polished boots hit the hardwood in perfect cadence. Their insignia gleamed beneath the chandelier. No one moved. Not even James. The man at the front was tall, greying at the temples, his expression carved from battlefield stone. I recognized him instantly. Colonel Nathaniel Rock. The last time I saw him, he was bleeding out in a half-destroyed convoy in the middle of the Sahel Desert, lungs rattling, eyes locked on mine as I dragged his broken body out of a burning Humvee under mortar fire. Now he was standing in my grandmother's foyer, crisp and commanding, his eyes scanning the room until they locked on me. He didn't look at James. He didn't look at the cuffs. He looked at me and saluted. "Brigadier General Whitmore," he said, voice sharp enough to slice the silence, "we're here to extract you." Every head at the table snapped toward him, then back to me. Chairs scraped the floor, forks dropped. My mother gasped. My father's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. James froze. "What the hell?" he began, but Raw wasn't finished. "Stand down," he commanded, addressing James without looking at him. James blinked. "I'm sorry. Who the hell are you?" Colonel Rock stepped forward, the other officers fanning out behind him like storm clouds on the horizon. "I am Colonel Nathaniel Rock, United States Army Intelligence Division, attached to Joint Special Operations Command, and you, Officer Whitmore, have made a grievous error." James stepped back instinctively, his hand still on my elbow. "This woman is my sister," he snapped. "She's impersonating. She is a decorated officer of the United States Armed Forces with active clearance above your entire department combined." Raw cut-in voice low and lethal. "She has served in 4 active war zones, led 2 classified intelligence task forces, and is the recipient of 3 Defense Superior Service medals. She outranks you in every sense imaginable." James looked like he'd been slapped. For what? Rock's eyes narrowed. You just placed a brigadier general under unlawful arrest in front of civilian witnesses during an ongoing classified operation. Aunt Linda gasped. Amanda whispered something to Kyle, who now looked like he might throw up. James stumbled back, the badge on his belt suddenly looking very small. "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "She never told anyone. She never said." "You didn't ask," I said quietly. The cuffs were removed by a young lieutenant with swift, practiced hands. I rubbed my wrists slowly, letting the red marks show. James looked at me like he was seeing a ghost or a stranger. "You let me do this," he said, stunned. "You could have stopped it. I warned you," I said. "You didn't listen." Colonel Rowe stepped forward again. "You may not understand what you've jeopardized tonight, Officer Whitmore, but you will. There will be an investigation." James opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes darted to our mother, who was now crying softly into a linen napkin. Our father stared at the shattered glass on the floor, unmoving. Grandma Elin, still seated, spoke for the first time since the soldiers arrived. "Is it true, Claire?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You've really been serving all this time?" I turned toward her and nodded. "Yes, Grandma, every single day." She closed her eyes, lips trembling. Then she whispered, "I always knew you were something special. I'm so sorry. It was the only apology I would ever need." As the officers moved to escort me out, Rock turned to me and spoke under his breath. "You didn't have to come here, you know. You could have ignored that letter." "I know," I said. "Then why did you?" I looked at Grandma, because she's the only one who never asked me to be someone else. Colonel Rock didn't move from the center of the room. He stood with the stillness of a man used to being listened to, commanding every molecule of attention without raising his voice. Around us, the air was heavy with disbelief. Even the chandelier above seemed to stop swaying, as if afraid to make a sound. "For the record," Raw said, his tone sharp and public now, "Brigadier General Claire Whitmore is currently operating under full clearance within the parameters of Operation Harvest Flame, an active, ongoing mission authorized by the Department of Defense and directly overseen by Joint Command." He let the words hang. No one spoke. Not Amanda, not Aunt Carla, not even my father. My mother had stopped crying, but her eyes remained locked on the floor. James swallowed hard. His hand hovered near his badge, unsure now whether it was a symbol of power or proof of failure. "You've interfered with the classified movements of a senior intelligence officer," Raw continued, this time directly addressing James. "Your actions tonight constitute obstruction of a federal operation." "I didn't know," James muttered, color draining from his face. "Didn't know," Rock repeated, incredulous. "Didn't know because you didn't bother to follow proper channels, confirm identity through military liaison, or here's a wild thought, not handcuff someone without probable cause." She doesn't even have a LinkedIn profile," James snapped, suddenly defensive, the edge of his voice bordering on desperate. There was a beat of stunned silence. Then, somewhere behind me, one of the officers audibly exhaled in disbelief. Raw took a step closer, voice dropping into something more lethal. "You stalked your sister, collected unauthorized surveillance, and publicly accused a decorated officer in front of civilians." "Do you have any idea what that means?" James faltered. I was trying to protect my family by compromising national security," Rock snapped. "You tailed an intelligence officer with active field responsibility. Do you have even a basic understanding of what could have happened?" The twist didn't come from his tone. It came from the document he pulled from his own coat. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately. "Due to your interference," he said, 2 embedded assets were prematurely extracted from position. One agent was compromised in the process. The other is currently missing." A wave of horror washed through the room. Kyle's phone slipped from his hand. My mother gasped. My father finally looked up, his face ash white. James's mouth opened, but no sound came. "This isn't about pride," Rock continued. "This is about lives, about teams who rely on invisibility, on precise timing, on not being betrayed by someone's amateur witch hunt dressed up as brotherly concern." I didn't know, James whispered again, weaker this time. That excuse won't hold up in court, Rock said flatly. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Every accusation I could have thrown had already been obliterated by facts. And still, I watched James try to process it all. The rank he had ignored, the mission he had endangered, the sister he had humiliated, thinking it would make him a hero. Rock turned to me. General, do you wish to press charges at this time? I took a long breath. My hands were steady now, the ache from the cuffs fading, replaced by something deeper. Clarity. Not yet, I said, meeting James's eyes. Not until he understands the cost, Raw nodded once. Understood. Then he faced James again. But know this, there will be consequences. The chain of command does not tolerate reckless interference, no matter the badge you carry. James didn't respond. His world had narrowed to a pinpoint, a black hole where certainty used to live. Behind him, Grandma reached out and touched the edge of the table for balance. James, she said softly, what have you done? He didn't answer, and for the first time, I saw it. The flicker of realization in his eyes. Not just shame, not just fear, something colder, the truth. James's composure cracked, splintered not by Colonel Rowe's scathing reprimand, but by the weight of what he had actually done. He looked around the room, eyes wild, seeking a lifeline among faces that now looked uncertain, some ashamed, others confused. I didn't mean to cause harm, he said, voice strained. I thought she was hiding something dangerous. You were right, I said coldly, but it wasn't what you thought. It was the kind of danger that doesn't come from secrets, but from truth you refuse to accept. James turned to our parents. Mom, Dad, I was trying to protect you. I didn't want someone using our family name for something fake. I was doing what any good son would. My mother didn't speak. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap, they looked bloodless. My father's mouth opened, then closed. Protecting them, I said, my voice soft but slicing, or protecting the image of yourself you think they need. James's expression shifted. What's that supposed to mean? You weren't looking for the truth, I said. You were looking for confirmation. You wanted to prove that I was less because if I was less, then you could keep being the favorite, the one who made them proud, the golden boy. That's not true, he snapped. It is, I replied, calm now. You didn't search for evidence because you cared. You searched because you wanted to control the story. You couldn't stand the fact that maybe, just maybe, I didn't need their praise to matter. His face twisted. You walked away from all of us. You didn't even say goodbye, because I knew goodbye wouldn't mean anything to people who never said hello. That line landed hard. Aunt Linda sucked in a breath. Amanda blinked rapidly. Even Kyle sat up straighter. James stepped forward as if proximity could save face. This isn't about me. It's always been about you, I said. Every family photo, every dinner, every conversation, you were the standard. I was the silence. You could have said something. No, I said, shaking my head. I tried. You don't remember, but I tried. You just didn't like the version of me that didn't fit your narrative. Then came the twist. From the far end of the table, a chair scraped back. Uncle Mason, our father's cousin, a Vietnam vet with 3 Purple Hearts and a permanent limp, stood slowly, his hand
gripping the table for balance. I remember when James graduated the academy, he said, voice growly but strong. I told your dad that boy is going to carry this family's legacy. I believed it. James straightened slightly, searching for an ally. But today, Mason's eyes moved to me. Today, I saw a woman sit still while being humiliated. A woman stand taller than her uniform. A woman who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. He pointed a thick finger at James. You embarrassed yourself, boy. Not because you were wrong, but because you needed her to fail. Then he turned back to me. Claire, I don't say this lightly, but I've worn that flag across seas and back, and I've never been prouder to know someone serving under it. James staggered back a step. The room cracked open. Energy shifted. Years of unspoken judgment shifted weight. Aunt Linda whispered, "God, Claire." Amanda looked down, ashamed. Even my father blinked slowly like his lens had finally come into focus. James's mouth worked for a defense. "You don't understand. She was always the weird one. Always in her room with maps and code books, never smiling, always making things complicated." "That wasn't weird," I said. "That was dedication. That was lonely. It was necessary." He shook his head, eyes glistening now. "Why didn't you ever just ask to be part of us?" "I did," I said. "You just never heard me?" The walls of Fort Wexler's secure briefing wing were steel gray, windowless, and indifferent to emotion. It was the kind of place where sentiment didn't exist, where decisions were made in bullet points and trust was measured in blood, not promises. I sat at the head of the table, uniform, crisp, ribbons in perfect alignment. Across from me sat James Whitmore. No badge, no belt, no authority, just a pale gray suit that looked too big on his shoulders. He was smaller now, not just physically, but existentially. The air between us was thick with history, but none of it mattered here. This wasn't about childhood. This was about consequences. I slid the file across the table without a word. He hesitated before opening it. Inside surveillance logs, audio transcriptions, timestamps, and payment records. Every detail of the private investigator he'd hired to follow me. Every location he'd staked out. Every time I was photographed leaving federal buildings. Every call monitored. Every shadow he tried to crawl into. James flipped through the pages, face slack with horror. "You tapped Grandma's phone," I said flatly. "Installed a listening device into her landline just so you could trace my contact schedule." His mouth parted. "I didn't." "You did," I interrupted. "And it's all in that report. You knew she was the only one I kept in touch with. And you used her to triangulate my movement. You used her." "I wasn't trying to hurt her," he said quickly. "I just needed to know if you were telling the truth. You could have asked me. I couldn't trust you." "No, I said you didn't want to." He looked down. "You have no idea what it's like to feel like the one being lied to. And you have no idea what it's like to live your entire life trying not to make people uncomfortable just by existing." He didn't respond. I opened the second folder. This one smaller, labeled with a single word, damage. "Your interference compromised 2 field operatives," I said. "One of them made it back. The other didn't. He had a family, James, a wife, 2 daughters." His hands trembled. "You didn't just stalk your sister," I said. "You disrupted a federal operation. You got someone killed." He looked up, and for a moment he was the brother I remembered, wide-eyed, desperate, grasping at meaning. But that brother was a memory, not a man. "I didn't mean for any of that to happen," he said. "I thought I was doing the right thing." I finished for him, protecting the family, saving face. He swallowed hard. "I was wrong. Yes," I said. "You were." Silence fell, not the heavy, judgmental silence of our childhood dinners. This was military silence, absolute procedural, the kind that precedes consequence. "There will be a formal inquiry," I said. "Your badge has already been suspended. The Justice Department will determine the charges." James looked down again, ashamed. "And James," I added, "don't expect me to intervene. This isn't personal. It's protocol." He nodded slowly. "I understand." "No," I said. "You don't. Not yet. But you will." For a moment, we just sat there, not as siblings, not even as adversaries, just as 2 people with nothing left to say that could fix what had been broken. Then I stood. Meeting adjourned. Meeting. James didn't move when I stood. He didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't even blink. For a long moment, he simply sat there, motionless, hands folded over the damning file like it might vanish if he wished hard enough. Then he cracked. It started small, a tremble in the corner of his mouth, a stutter in his breathing. Then the tears came, slow.
Silent, unfamiliar. Not the kind of weeping born of tragedy, but something more primal. A confession long buried, erupting without permission. I was jealous, he said, barely above a whisper. I didn't sit back down. He looked up at me, eyes glassy. I thought I hated you for being cold, for being distant, but I didn't. I hated that I didn't understand you, that no one did. And then when Grandma kept writing to you after you left, I started wondering why not me. He wiped at his face with the cuff of his sleeve, embarrassed by his own collapse. She stopped writing me. Did you know that? After you left, she barely called. Didn't send birthday cards anymore, just silence. I stood still, arms at my sides, unmoved. I used to wonder what I did wrong, he said. I thought maybe she blamed me for pushing you away. Maybe she liked you better. Maybe you were the one she wanted to keep. You didn't do anything wrong, I said calmly. She just finally saw the difference. He blinked. What difference? That I didn't need her approval to be loyal. You only loved her when she loved you back. His expression cracked again. I didn't mean to ruin your life, Claire, he whispered. I just wanted to be seen. I walked slowly around the table and stood beside him, not to comfort, but to clarify. You wanted to be seen, I said, but you didn't want anyone else to be seen more clearly than you. He looked at me devastated. I was a ghost in our house, I continued. For 18 years, I swallowed my thoughts, minimized my wins, and made myself small enough to fit inside your shadow. And when I finally left, you didn't miss me. You missed the version of yourself that looked better when I wasn't around. His jaw clenched. I didn't realize. No, I cut in, you didn't. Because you never had to. He opened his mouth, but the door opened first. 2 military escorts stepped in, unformed, stoic. One stood behind James, the other by the door. He looked at them, then at me. Are you really going to let them take me? This isn't about what I'll let, I said. It's about what you did. You had choices. You made them. But we're family. I tilted my head slowly. Then you should have remembered that before you tried to destroy mine. The officers gave him a moment. James rose shakily. His eyes were red now, not from anger, but from the realization that no apology, no explanation would return what he had broken. As he passed me, he paused. I didn't think it would go this far. It always goes this far, I said. When men like you believe silence equals weakness. He lowered his gaze and let the officers guide him from the room. The door closed behind them with a soft but final click. I stood alone for a few seconds. Then I turned my back to the door and I didn't look back. The barracks were quiet that night, the kind of quiet that settled into your chest, heavy and absolute. I sat on the edge of my cot, boots still on, uniform jacket folded neatly on the chair beside me. The only light in the rooms it came from the small desk lamp casting long shadows against the metal lockers. I hadn't cried in years. Not when I got my first deployment. Not when we lost Marcus during the raid in Kunar province. Not even when I got promoted to Brigadier General in a room full of men who couldn't meet my eye. But tonight the silence felt sharper and the weight of everything, the dinner, the accusations, the handcuffs, James's face as he was led away, settled like armor I could no longer remove. Then the phone rang. Not my official comm, not my encrypted military line, but the old personal cell I kept tucked in the bottom drawer, the one with only 6 numbers saved in it. I stared at the screen. Grandma, I hesitated, thumb hovering over the green icon like it was a trigger. Then I answered, hello. There was a pause, a breath, then Claire. Her voice was softer than usual, but steady, familiar in a way that made my throat tighten. I wasn't sure you'd pick up, she said. I almost didn't, I admitted. I wouldn't blame you if you hadn't. There was another pause, then she said it. I just wanted to tell you something, and I need you to hear it, not as your grandmother, but as the only person in that room who truly saw you. I waited. You are the greatest thing this family has ever produced, she said. The words hit me like wind through cracked armor. Sudden, cold, real, Not James, she continued, not your father, not the whole parade of Whitmore men who drank bourbon and chased approval and never once stopped to wonder what kind of silence they left behind. You. I closed my eyes. I should have said it sooner, she added. Years ago when you came to me with maps and questions about courage and sacrifice. When you disappeared and all I had left was a note on the fridge. When your mother told me not to encourage your phases and I didn't push back. I swallowed hard but said nothing. I was a coward, she said quietly, and I'm sorry. A tear slipped down my cheek, uninvited, unwelcome, but real. I watched them. Freeze you out, she went on. And I said nothing. I watched them praise James like a messiah and let you disappear like you were never there. I let the silence grow between us, and I hate myself for that. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. You don't have to apologize, Grandma. Yes, I do, she said. Because you didn't just survive them. You became something so far beyond what they could comprehend, and they punished you for it. Another tear and another. I wanted to call you after they took James away, she said. Not to defend him, not to explain, just to tell you, I see you, Claire, I always have, and I am so, so proud. For the first time in over a decade, I cried without shame. Not for the years lost, not for the people who never asked, but for the one who finally did. Thank you, I whispered, my voice cracking. You don't have to thank me, she said gently. You just have to live, not serve, not prove, just live. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I could. I didn't plan on telling her. The stories weren't ones I shared, not even with commanding officers, unless they were printed in post-top debriefs. They belonged to places without names, to nights without moonlight, to faces buried in silence. But something about her voice, frail, cracked but clear, made the words climb from places I had long buried. There was a mission once I began slowly. 2 years into my second deployment, border town, Eastern Europe. Intel said, low risk, we were only supposed to watch, document, movement, report, nothing more. She stayed quiet, listening the way only she ever had, with full attention. I was leading a small team, 6 people, 2 of them barely 20. We were holed up in an abandoned farmhouse outside the city. 3 days in, the pattern shifted. Locals stopped passing. Crows went silent. And we knew what happened, she asked softly. They came at night. Not local militia, not rebels, trained, clean, too clean. They knew exactly where we were, how to cut the power, which walls were load-bearing. It wasn't an ambush, it was a message. I paused, my throat tightened. They got Jacob first through the window, a sniper. He didn't scream, just dropped. I told the others to move. 1 froze, 1 ran. I dragged her back before the second round hit. We made it into the cellar. No light, no signal, no reinforcements, a breath. We were down there for 16 hours. No food, no comms, blood everywhere. And I sat with them, 2 kids, barely men, trying to keep them alive, trying to stay awake while my own shoulder bled through 4 layers of gauze. I rubbed that shoulder now, though the scar had long faded. When we were finally pulled out, the report said, minor engagement, successful withdrawal, that was it. That was the headline. Clara, I didn't tell anyone what it cost, I said, my voice shaking. Didn't tell them what I saw when I closed my eyes, what I smelled in that dark, what I whispered to keep those boys from giving up, because it didn't matter. It mattered, she said. I smiled, faintly, not in the way they wanted, not in medals or write-ups, not in the kind of stories people pass around at reunions. She was quiet, waiting. I chose silence, Grandma, I said, not because I was ashamed or afraid, but because I thought if I stayed silent, maybe it would hold the shape of something sacred. Maybe if I didn't speak, they'd still believe, still wonder, still hope. And if you had spoken, they would have doubted, questioned, dismantled it like they always did. She exhaled a slow breath. So you carried the weight, so they wouldn't shatter the truth. I nodded. I kept it because I thought it was the only way to stay connected. If they couldn't understand my life, at least they couldn't rewrite it. Silence again, but this time not empty, full. You know, she said after a while, they always said you were too quiet, that you didn't fight hard enough for your place. I know, but I see now, she continued, that your silence wasn't absence. It was armor and strength. That kind of strength terrifies people. I blinked away another tear. She sighed. I should have told them. Should have spoken for you when you couldn't. I thought maybe you didn't need it, that you were better off away from all this. But I was wrong. You weren't, I whispered. You did what you could. You were the only one who never turned away. She didn't respond with words this time, just a soft sob. Not loud, not broken, just enough. And then I joined her, two women, two generations, crying, not for loss but for recognition finally spoken aloud in silence together. The offer came wrapped in ceremony delivered by a 3-star general with a handshake, a sealed envelope, and a speech about unparalleled service and strategic brilliance. The words echoed in the marble hallways of the Pentagon like a formal blessing. The next step, a bigger office, a 4th star. But I didn't open the envelope. Not right away. Instead, I took the long route back to my quarters, the one that passed through the training grounds at Fort Hawthorne, where fresh recruits were halfway through obstacle drills, boots muddy, lungs on fire, hearts still learning how to carry both pride and fear. I watched them for a moment, one struggling to scale the wall, another shouting encouragement from below. No rank yet, no ribbons, just raw will. And I remembered what it was like to be unseen, to climb without anyone noticing, to earn everything in silence. Later that night, I returned to my desk. I stared at the envelope still sealed, then placed it in the top drawer without opening it. The next morning, I made my decision. When the Defense Secretary's office called to congratulate me, I thanked them for the nomination, then declined. They were stunned. "May we ask why, General?" the aide said, confused but respectful. "Because I know where I'm needed," I replied. I was reassigned to instructor duty at Fort Hawthorne within the week. Not glamorous, not public, but foundational, and that's what I wanted. I didn't need a bigger title. I needed a longer impact. Every day I walked the field with cadetses, some nervous, some cocky, some barely holding it together. But in all of them, I saw versions of who I used to be. Uncertain, quiet, too easy to overlook. Those were the ones I focused on. I pulled them aside after drills, asked about their stories, gave them silence without pressure, praise without pretense, discipline without humiliation. Slowly, they began to rise, not because they got louder, but because they got stronger. My legacy wasn't going to be a building with my name on it or a plaque on a wall. It would be the voices I helped strengthen, the invisible weight I taught them how to carry with grace. One evening, after lights out, I sat in my office and pulled out a blank sheet of stationery, cream-coloured, the kind that smelled faintly of lavender and paper memories. I wrote, "Dear Grandma, you told me to live, so I am. Not on a podium, not in front of cameras, but here on muddy fields, beside trembling hands. Inside the first spark of belief when someone realizes they're capable of more." I didn't take the promotion, not because I wasn't proud, but because I knew the mission I'm called to doesn't require another star. It requires presence, patience, and the kind of listening you taught me when I was 8. And you sat through my 15-minute speech on NATO logistics like it was a bedtime story. They don't talk about us, the quiet ones, in family stories. But I've learned something. Silence can still echo if what we build is strong enough to carry. I hope I'm building well. With all my heart, Claire. I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and wrote her name in the same looping script she used to sign birthday cards. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't writing to explain. I was writing to share. Writing to the classroom smelled like fresh paint, rubber mats, and anxious potential. It wasn't much, just 4 beige walls, a projector, and rows of folding chairs. But to the 23 cadets sitting inside, it might as well have been the gates of Olympus. Their uniforms were new, boots still stiff, and their postures ranged from overconfident to trembling. I walked in without ceremony. No entourage, no medals, just me. They stood when I entered. I nodded and they sat. The kind of silent mutual respect that doesn't need explanation. I scanned the room, letting the silence settle. Then I began. "You won't remember most of what I say today," I said, arms folded behind my back. "You'll remember your first failed drill, your first time throwing up after PT, the name of the person who chewed you out for walking too slow. But you won't remember my name, and that's okay." A few exchanged glances. I paced slowly between the rows. "Because I'm not here to be remembered, I'm here to make sure you survive." A hand raised, a young woman near the back, buzz cut, freckles, trying to hide the tremor in her wrist. "Yes," she hesitated. "Permission to ask a personal question, Mum?" "Go ahead." "Why did you join?" she asked. "The army. I mean, why you?" I paused. That question had been asked before, in interviews, at formal dinners, on paperwork, but no answer ever quite fit. Until now. I turned to face her fully because it was the first place that didn't try to change me. A quiet rippled across the room. In school, I was too intense. At home, too quiet. In my family, I didn't fit the mold of what they thought strength looked like. But here they handed me a map, a radio, a mission, and no one asked me to smile while I did it. Somewhere in the middle row, someone exhaled slowly. I continued, "If you're here because you think it'll make you brave, you're wrong. The uniform doesn't make you brave. It just shows you where your fear lives, and then it asks you to walk through it." I didn't tell them about James, about handcuffs, about dinners turned into trials. That wasn't their burden, but I saw echoes of my own past in their faces, the hunger to matter, the ache of not being enough anywhere else. And I hoped desperately that this place would give them what it gave me. Not belonging exactly, but purpose without permission. After the session, I stayed behind to tidy up. No one lingered. That was fine. Impact didn't always announce itself. As I packed my notes, I noticed something different outside the hallway. A small gathering. A man in civilian clothes standing beside a plaque I hadn't seen before. I stepped closer. The plaque was newly mounted, brushed steel against granite. The heading read, "Wall of Honor Unspoken Service." Below it, etched in precise Sarai font, were 7 names. Some I recognized, quiet legends who'd shaped operations from the shadows. The last name stopped me, Brigadier General Claire E. Whitmore, for serving in silence and surviving with loyalty. I stared, no speeches, no cameras, just a name, my name, on a wall where only a few would look, where even fewer would understand. And yet it was enough because it wasn't for them. It was for me. And for the first time in 38 years, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt real. I felt seen. And as I stood there alone, but never again lonely, I let a small smile break across my face.